Welcome to EasyFlow. In this video, we will step you through everything you need to know to build and orchestrate your workflow. We will provide examples ranging from simple to complex use cases. Let's first create a new flow with the title, Orchestrate Your Workflow. In order to support this demonstration, we created a Google Sheets document consisting of multiple sheets. This will help us to cover many different use case scenarios. Let me quickly summarize the steps and explain our plan. First step is to read data from Google Analytics. The second step is to send Google Analytics data to Google Sheets in a single attempt. If we receive 100 records from Google Analytics, we should send them all to Google Sheets at once, without iterating through each record individually. The third step is to send Google Analytics data to Google Sheets. This will be done by using a conditional statement that will determine whether the data should be sent to Sheet 2 or Sheet 3. The fourth step is to send logs to Google Sheets about the activities being processed during the above steps. Next, we'll cover how to loop and iterate using EasyFlow. For this demo, we'll read a list of files from Google Drive and send this list to Google Sheets, one record at a time. We will cover iteration through two examples, starting with the simple one and then progressing to the advanced one. Finally, we will show you how to configure your workflow to run automatically based on a schedule. Let's get started. From the Google Analytics, select and configure the behavior operation. You will need to specify the connection to Google Analytics, your account ID, and the desired start and end date for your search criteria. Don't forget to set the Google Analytics as a starting point. From the Preview Results panel, you can test and see the results of your configuration. As you can see, 824 records are returned from Google Analytics, and the records are presented in an array of arrays in JSON format under the rows key. Next, we need to send all the data in a single attempt to Google Sheet. While configuring the Google Sheet step, you will notice that it requires the data to be sent as JSON format, with the records as an array of arrays. By comparing the data requirements for Google Sheets with the results returned by Google Analytics, we can see that Google Analytics returns the rows as an array of arrays as well. This means that the format returned by Google Analytics matches the format required by Google Sheets. So all we need to do is a simple mapping of the Google Analytics data without any restructuring or transformation. This can be done by highlighting the part that needs to be mapped from the Data text box, clicking on the 4 dots icon, and then locating the Rows item under the Behavior step in the Dynamic Content panel. Click the Apply button to save your changes, then click Preview Results to test your flow. It appears that 824 has been successfully sent to Google Sheets, as expected. The next case is to send the data to Google Sheets through a conditional statement that will determine whether the data should be inserted into Sheet 2 or Sheet 3. Let's link the steps together by drawing an arrow from the second step to Sheet 2 and another arrow from the second step to Sheet 3. We can label the arrows by giving them names, Sheet 2 and Sheet 3. From the Sheet 2 arrow, we need to configure the condition expression criteria. If this condition is met, the data will be inserted into Sheet 2. The same concept will apply to the Sheet 3 arrow. In this example, we will give the user the capability to specify the target sheet where he wants to send the data by using the start event variable. To create a start event variable, click the cog icon in the top toolbar, then click Variables. We will name it var sheet name. Next, we will configure the condition expression in each of the Sheet 2 and Sheet 3 arrows. Let's see how. Click on the Sheet 2 arrow. Then, click on the 4 dots icon located on the right side of the criteria text box. From the Dynamic Content panel, locate the Variable group and choose the var sheet name variable. Again, under the Dynamic Content General Functions tab, choose Equals from the Operators group. Type Sheet 2 inside the text box directly after the equals red sign. Click on the Save button to save your changes. As a result, if the user gives the create variable a value equal to Sheet 2, then the data will be inserted into Sheet 2 of the Google Sheets. Repeat the same configuration concept for the Sheet 3 arrow. But instead of saying equals, let's say not equals to Sheet 2. Finally, we need to configure the Google Sheets steps after these conditions. For the Google Sheet 2 step, we are going to select Sheet 2 as the range value, and for the Google Sheet 3 step, we are going to select Sheet 3 as the range. Now is the time to test. We will clean the previous example data from Google Sheets first and start fresh. From the Workflow Visual Designer, press the Run button located in the top toolbar to start your flow execution. Give the var sheet name variable a value of Sheet 2. Click Runs as, then Run in Preview. As we can see in the result, the data has been successfully inserted into Sheet 2. Let's check it against the data in Google Sheets to validate. Let's run the flow again, but this time we will give the var sheet name variable a value of Sheet 3. We can see that the data went to Sheet 3 as expected. The next case is to send the data to the Logs sheet in Google Sheets. For every flow run, we will insert a row with 3 columns into the Logs sheet. Sheet name represents the conditional sheet name from the previous case. Count the number of records being inserted into Google Sheet. Date the date and time when data is entered into the Google Sheet. To configure the Logs step, select the Add a Row option from the Operations panel. In the Data text box, you will need to input columns with the appropriate data. For example, the third column should be mapped to the Date Now function from the date and time function expressions. The first column should be mapped to the var sheet name variable. The second column should be mapped to the length of the rows array from the Google Analytics step. Let's run the flow again. We can see that a record has been inserted into the log sheet on Google Sheets as expected. Next, we'll cover how to use EasyFlow to loop and iterate. We'll start with a simple use case by reading a list of files from Google Drive and adding them to a Google Sheet one record at a time. First, let's configure the Google Drive step by choosing and configuring the List Files option from the Operations panel. Also, don't forget to set this step as a starting point. By clicking Preview Results, you will be able to see how the returned data from Google Drive looks. As you can see, the list of files are returned in JSON format as an array of objects under the file's key name. In the Dynamic Content panel, you can see a visual representation of the returned data. For example, under the List Files group, you can see the files array and its child items, such as kind, name, and MIME type. The next step is to send the files list to Google Sheets through a simple iteration. This is why we need to connect to the loop connector. In the loop connector, we must specify a value for the index length text box in order to determine how many times the loop should iterate. By concept, the loop should iterate several times, equal to the number of returned files. To do that, click on the 4 dots, then go to the Array Function Expressions tab and choose Length. Go to the Mapping tab and locate the List Files Google Drive group. Choose the Files key and place it inside the Length function expression. Save your changes. Next, let's configure and link the Add a Row operation of Google Sheets. After selecting the connection to Google Sheet, and filling out the targeted spreadsheet and the range, we have to map the data text box with the files list coming from Google Drive. In the demo, we will map 3 columns. The final step is to close the loop by dragging an arrow from the Google Sheets step back to the loop step, then press Save. Let's test and validate the outcome of this automation by running our flow. As you can see, the data is coming to Google Sheets one record at a time. There may be times when you need more control over the individual steps and logic within a loop or iteration. In these cases, EasyFlow has a variety of methods to give you more control. The next demonstration will show you how to handle an advanced and complex iteration by looping and picking up every record from Google Drive files list by its index using variables and function expressions. To make this demonstration clear and easy to explain, we will split this case into multiple stages. First, let's reduce the number of iterations to 10 and connect the loop to the Google Sheets advanced iteration instead of the simple one. Next, we will create a workflow variable called var index with default value set to 0. This variable will represent the index during the iteration. To increment the var index variable by 1 in each iteration, we have to use the variable setter built-in connector. From the variable setter step, map the var index variable to the key text box by clicking on the 4 dots icon. Then locate the variable and click on its plus sign. The var index variable should be added to the text box in black. From the values text box, click on the 4 dots and select the var index variable. Then, click on the plus, so the syntax expression will be var index plus 1. Note that the var index is a workflow variable. This means its value will persist between runs. Therefore, we must give it an initial value of 0 before it enters the loop. This can be accomplished by placing and configuring a variable setter before the loop step. Now, let's close the loop cycle by linking the last variable setter back to the loop step. After having the index configured, we are ready to begin configuring the Google Sheets Add a Row advanced scenario. In the data text box, we will use the get function expressions to map the columns of Google Sheets with the files list coming from Google Drive. This can be done by highlight the desired Google Sheet column from the data text box. Click on the 4 dots icon, then on the General Functions tab. Select the get function expression. The get function expression allows you to capture data from JSON. It required 2 inputs. First, the source of data. In our case, we have to select the files array of objects from the Google Drive files list. Second, the path to the data within the selected source. In our case, n, kind, n.name or n.id, where n represents the index of record that we are targeting. In the first attempt, we will give n a value of 0 for demonstration purposes. After saving the configuration, we can now run the flow and test the outcome. As we can see, the same record is repeatedly inserted into Google Sheets because we fixed the index to 0. On the second try, we'll replace the fixed 0 index with the var index variable and run the flow again. As we can see, the record is successfully being inserted into Google Sheets. Finally, we'll add an additional column to Google Sheets, representing the index number itself, and run the flow again. You can see, data is successfully being inserted into Google Sheets, including the incremental index value. The next case is to show you how to configure your workflow to run automatically based on a schedule. We will use the Google Analytics behavior step as a starting point and reconfigure its start date and end date settings to capture data from Google Analytics for the last 7 days. The workflow will automatically read data from the previous 7 days each time it is run. To configure the scheduler, click on the clock icon on the toolbar. You can set the interval between runs and the starting date and time for the first run. You can also enable or disable the scheduler based on your needs. After saving your scheduler settings, remember to make your workflow online by clicking the Offline button in the top right corner. Thank you for watching this video. Please feel free to contact us if you have any questions.